I've been building this kit of a propeller wagon, GW1 Morel. It's actually a Falcon kit. It had a few problems, not least was this brake gear, which was originally etched onto the side. So I've actually cut that off and relocated it so it lines up with the wheels. However, there is another problem that needs to be solved with this. If I just put it down and put on the casting, I think you'll see what I mean. The spring and axle box casting, if you look at it, is actually hanging off the side of the wagon. The hangers actually are not attached to the wagon at all, they are just hanging in mid-air. Not really something that's very acceptable. So I now have to think, how am I going to replace these? I've looked for suitable castings and failed. My thought is, let's try 3D printing to see if I can come up with something reasonable. So this is what the castings that came with it look like. If we look at a picture of the prototype, we can see what it really should be like. As you can see from this picture, the springs actually attached inboard of the edge of the wagon, as you'd expect, otherwise they wouldn't be supported at all, and are quite short. The basic axle box shape, however, isn't too bad. So how are we going to replicate this? I could modify the ones I have, but I'd need to do 4. So I thought I'd try a shortcut with 3D printing. So let's go over to Fusion and see how I went about it.
Having decided that I would go down the route of 3D printing to create new axle boxes for my Morel, I started out in my drawing package Fusion by actually drawing what the side of the wagon looked like, where those axle boxes and springs were going to go. So what I've done is I took measurements from that wagon and produced this picture you see here. The hole you see here is actually where the bearing for the wheels comes through the axle sides. There would need to be a corresponding hole in the axle boxes to take those bearings. This is actually a 3D print, although it's effectively a flat sheet. As you can see, it's got no real thickness to it. I had thought about simply getting scale measurements of what the axle box should look like and drawing based on that. However, I had good reason to believe that the etch of the actual wagon was probably not that accurate, so I decided the best thing to do was to have a background which represented the actual wagon side itself. I use a feature of Fusion 360 which allows you to have what are called separate bodies. So I've created one body here which is actually the wagon side, and then my axle box and spring is going to be another body. And in fact, I've already drawn it, so I'll just turn that on so you can see it. And this is the finished product. I'm not going to redraw it to show you what I did to get to this stage, but what I will do is just take you through some of the stages that I went through in drawing this. There's a handy feature in Fusion, which is this bar along the bottom that shows you the stages that you go through when doing a design, so you can actually look and see what you've done at each stage. So if I select and edit this sketch, for instance, you can see the first sketch is actually for that background. I won't bother with that one, that's extruding it out, that's creating another body. So here's where I start on the actual box proper, and I can edit that sketch, and you can see what I've actually drawn is effectively a rectangle based on the center of this bearing. Then I've created the rounded tops, and that was my first sketch. I then extruded that out to make the shape and put some fillets on it to round the edges. So that gave me the basic axle box shape. I then went on to do the two pillars that hold the ends of the springs. Let me just flatten this back to make it slightly easier to see what's going on. Sometimes the 3D view can be less than helpful. So I say, my next sketch was creating those pillars there, and they were extruded out to make two cylinders. I then started to draw in the leaf springs. So if we edit the leaf spring sketch, you can see what I did was two arcs parallel to each other and then joined at the end, so I could create a body which I could then make the first leaf of the spring, and I repeated that for each one and created these. So there's a number of sketches producing those. I actually put chamfers on them to try and get in the final print some demarcation between them. We will look at the print later and see how well or not that worked. So this sketch here is the last leaf of the spring. Then another sketch which is this part here, which comes from the axle box up and around the spring, and extruded that out. Next I started to sketch in the brackets that hold the spring to the wagon side, and there's two of those and they're extruding out, so fairly basic rectangles being extruded really. I then created a hole, so if we look at that sketch, oops, find the right sketch again, that one, you can see what I've actually done there is I've created, you don't see it very well unfortunately because of the way it's shown it to you, I created a hole going through which enabled me to basically add in these round bars here that go through the thing. I did a slightly bigger one there to get the impression of the fastening that holds that in place, and then I've added some chamfers. So it's all fairly standard stuff that you would have seen in the other video on making the motor mount, if you've watched that one. But it shows how with very basic drawing skills and simple shapes you can build something that actually looks quite complex, in this case a reasonable representation of an axle box. Now I'll just make that one a bit smaller.
I'll bring up the picture of the prototype axle box and spring arrangement again so we can see how our drawing compares. I think you'll agree we're missing a lot of the detail, but the general shape isn't too bad, and the positioning on the side of the wagon is fairly reasonable as well. I'm happy enough with this to at least print it off and see how well it works. I've skipped the slicing stage that's described in the video about the motor mount, and we're now at the stage where I've put the G-code file onto the printer and I've just requested it to print. Currently the printer's going through its self-test that it does at the beginning to calibrate where the bed is to do the actual printing, and then it will actually start and print our spring. I've sliced the axle box and spring using the finest settings available on my slicing program that my printer will support. I'm unsure as to what the results are like to be, as this is probably the finest item I've tried to print with this particular 3D printer. With calibration complete, and the nozzle and the print bed warming up to temperature, the print is just beginning. The print always starts by doing extrusion of some of its material across the edge, just to get rid of any leftover material, and also if you've changed colour, the colour maybe on that sort of thing. It's now made a start on the all important first layer. overzealous there on the zoom, I'm afraid. Just pull back and get it back into focus. So there we can see the basic shape of our axle box and spring is taking shape. We've completed our first layer and we're starting to build up the print. This is going to take a little while, so rather than sit and watch the whole thing, let's skip forward and see what happens. We've now jumped forward 6 minutes and our print is almost complete. It's quite difficult to see just how good the print is because it's quite small and mostly hidden by the nozzle assembly. It's certainly building up, however, and looking something like it should. I think we'll have to wait for it to finish before we can get a better look. As the final bits of filament are deposited on the active box itself, it's not looking overly promising. It looks like there's lots of sort of whispery flakes on the print. We're going to have to take a better look. Certainly while it's on the print bed, it doesn't look very promising. It is covered in all this whispery material. I think I'm going to have to take it off the print bed and do some cleaning up to remove this to see what lies underneath. Certainly the basic shapes are there, and you can start to make out underneath the sort of noise and amongst the layering you can see that all the bits that we need are actually there. The detail here is actually reasonably good. I'm quite pleased because I wasn't expecting it to be quite as good. However, on closer inspection there is a flaw. If you look at this top view, having cleaned it up a bit more, you can see the major problem. That is that the top leaf of the spring isn't meeting the hangers at all. I suspect the layer of material we tried to print was too thin for this printer to handle. I don't think I'm going to be able to use this printer to print the final complete springs. However, maybe I can use it as the basis of something. I'm going to have to think a bit harder about how I want to do this, or maybe modify the design to make this area slightly thicker so that it can be printed. I'm not completely disheartened by this. As much as anything, it's good to know what the limitation of the tool might be. Maybe we've hit the limitation of this particular printer, maybe we can do something with it. That's yet to be determined. One thing's for sure, I don't think this has been wasted effort. I'm not sure I'm finished with this task yet. Maybe I'll get time before the spring weekend to have another go, or maybe we'll have to wait until another time. Thank you for looking this far. I hope you've enjoyed this insight into what you can do with the 3D printer.